Hi, this is Andy XL back with another NFXL podcast. Haven't done one of these in a while. The last time I was doing these was in and around the draft for 2025, where I did draft previews by position and overall rankings, and also had a post-draft looked at how each team might have fared and how it might have affected their prospects looking forward to the 2025 season. I would just drop in for the third year in a row. Um, my predictions of the first three rounds, how many players of my top 150 went in the top 100. I was the most accurate again of any source I looked at, including Daniel Jeremiah, and that's the third year in a row that's been the case. So I'm patting myself on the back for getting the first three rounds nailed. So if you want to know about next year's draft, I've already got a big board of well over 600 players. So I'm already looking at next year's already. So I'll come back with that nearer the start of the college season. But since the draft, the story that's been rumbling away in the background and as is seems to be a year on year thing now. Um, Aaron Rodgers seems to have the world talking about him and where he's going to play his football, if he's going to play football, etc., etc. So in relation to that, it got me thinking, what is the track record of these veteran quarterbacks that change teams late in their career? So in recent seasons, we've seen a number of veteran quarterbacks with 10 years or more service in the NFL move to a new job. And this close season, or for next season, we're now going to have Rodgers, Geno Smith, and Russell Wilson doing the same for 2025. It's often seen by teams as putting a safe and experienced pair of hands on the helm of the ship. But how has this worked out for them? Has it seen teams sail on to reach paradise, or has it seen them steered into stormy waters and essentially sinking? Um, Putting an experienced captain in charge of the ship is basically giving him a new ship and crew, and it takes time to get used to, particularly when you have got used to other ships and crews, keeping that analogy going. So let's look at those that have made such moves this decade and how it worked out. Um, well, the first one, chronologically, Tom Brady when he moved from the Pats to the Bucks in 2020. Now, this is pretty much well known by everybody, obviously, but Brady was the established GOAT after spending 20 years in New England and winning 6 Super Bowl rings and 5 Super Bowl MVP trophies before he moved to Tampa for one last hurrah in 2020. In his first season in Tampa, Brady led the team to the postseason as a wild card team with an 11-5 record. It was a team that gradually improved as the season went on, and it really got it all to click in place in the postseason as they went on to win Brady his seventh Super Bowl ring. In 2021, they won the division again, but a better record, 13-4, but they lost narrowly to the Rams in the divisional round of the playoffs. And then 2022 was Brady's last season, in which the Bucks went 8-9 and failed to make the postseason. Basically, that squad that had won the Super Bowl was gradually disintegrating at that stage. The season before Brady joined in 2019, the Bucks only had a 7-9 record, but they had a dynamic passing offense with a quarterback, Jameis Winston, who led the league in interceptions, but also threw for a ton of yards. So replacing Winston with that, you couldn't get a more savvy quarterback, the GOAT Brady, who wasn't going to throw a load of TDs, was going to throw a lot of touchdowns, was a logical fit. He wasn't going to throw interceptions, though. So it couldn't have been a better fit to keep that highly ranked offense, but eliminate the stupid errors. In 2019, Winston threw 30 interceptions. Brady threw just 12 the following season. So it's easy to see how that made just a huge difference to that team. He also passed for 7 more touchdowns than Winston did the previous season. The yardage was down, but not disastrously. So overall, Brady obviously Kel Surprise was a massive upgrade on Winston. And he had the likes of Mike Evans and Chris Godwin already in place, and he brought veteran superstars like Antonio Brown and Rob Gronkowski with him from New England to give them an absolutely loaded offense. And Brady was also protected by one of the best O-lines in the league that year. Um, but the Bucks' defense also improved significantly through that season, And in my opinion, the D line and pass rushing unit were major contributors in them winning that Super Bowl game itself, and also with the largely unheralded but superb O line doing their share of the work in there. Brady got MVP, as quarterbacks get MVP every Super Bowl, but really it was the pass rush and the O line, the trenches, which is where the Bucks won that for me. But Brady was significant, as I said, in cutting out those errors and just making the offense so much more efficient. In short, when Brady and other key additions like the likes of Gronk, Brown, and Tristan Wirfs on the O line, it completed a loaded roster that was well equipped to win and just needed a talented quarterback, and they couldn't get any more talent than Brady to provide those finishing touches. So Brady was the key to completing this process and winning it all in 2020. And obviously that makes that move to take that veteran quarterback an unqualified success. Then in 2021, the next example was Matthew Stafford moving from the Lions to the Rams. After 12 seasons with Detroit, Stafford had played at a high or elite level pretty much season in, season out on a team not equipped to win titles, recording 10 wins or more just twice and only making the postseason in 3 of those 12 campaigns that Stafford was there, and then ducking out at the first stage of the playoffs on each of those occasions. Stafford was traded to the Rams. So really, he wasn't on a team that could get the job done in Detroit, but he moved to the Rams. Even more so than Brady, he landed on an absolutely loaded Rams roster who were clearly all in to win that first season Stafford arrived in LA. They went 12-5 in the regular season in 2021 to win the division, the NFC West. Stafford threw for 41 touchdowns, but his gunslinger tendencies did lead to 17 interceptions that season. He could not be said to have had a stellar cast of receivers like Brady had in New England, although that was the incredible year for Cooper Kupp, where he fell just shy of 2,000 receiving yards and had 16 touchdowns from a massive 145 receptions. And they also had a mid-season addition of Odell Beckham, which certainly helped their cause too. But overall, as was the case for Brady in Tampa, Stafford played behind a strong O-line, and the defense was a really good one that featured the likes of Aaron Donald and Jalen Ramsey in their prime. After a comfortable wildcard week win over the Cardinals, the Rams went on to beat Tampa, San Fran, and Cincy, all by just 3 points. So they played with fire, but they got it done. In the Super Bowl, the Rams were in big trouble. Halfway through the third quarter, they were trailing by 7. The run game was pretty much ineffective, and they'd lost Odell Beckham to injury in the second quarter. But then we had that inspirational rally led by Stafford and Kupp that saw them fight back to win it with a late pass from Stafford to Kupp. So, as with Brady, this was taking a highly talented quarterback and plugging him into a team that was fully loaded and ready to win. But again, getting Stafford in to replace a young and at times struggling Jared Goff was fundamental in terms of having the right guy to steer the ship to success. Again, the finishing piece, if you like. And that fourth quarter in the Super Bowl alone is evidence of that. So again, that's another case where this really worked as long as you had a roster ready to win. You weren't just sticking a quarterback in there and saying, go on then, win it for us. So let's look at the next example after I've had a quick drink. And that's Russell Wilson, who left Seattle after a long tenure there to move to Denver in 2022. So 10 seasons in Seattle, in which Wilson led them to the postseason 8 times and won the Super Bowl in the 2013-14 season. At that time, that marked Wilson as a clear Hall of Fame candidate and one of the most highly rated quarterbacks in the game. But in truth, throughout his time in Seattle, his star gradually began to wane, and it was his worst year in Seattle in 2021, where he recorded a career low in passing yards, and the team slumped to a 7-10 record, which led to Wilson heading to Denver for a fresh start. He took over from a combination of Teddy Bridgewater and Drew Lock, who had quarterbacks for the Broncos in 2021. So hopes were as high as a stadium in Denver that Wilson was going to be the difference maker the Broncos needed. It was, yeah, Wilson's still a quality quarterback. We haven't had the quality quarterback. That's all we need. Um, Looking at what Bridgewater and Locke had done, they'd had a combined stat line of 3,839 yards with 20 touchdowns and 9 interceptions in 2021. So it wasn't a high bar for Wilson to improve on. But he ended up throwing for just 3,500 yards, 16 touchdowns, fewer than the previous season, and 11 interceptions, more than Bridgewater and Locke had done in the previous season, which actually made him a downgrade in all three of those stats. Admittedly, he missed 2 games of the season, but even so, his lack of performance led to the Broncos' 5-12 record, and he was 4-11 in the games he played. So it basically just didn't work, and it didn't get better in 2023. Yes, he improved his touchdown numbers to 26 and reduced his interception count to 8, but passed for a measly 3,070 yards as he once again missed 2 games that season. Now, Wilson was acquired as a 33-year-old, so after 2 failed seasons and with his mobility lessening by the week, let alone the year, he was nowhere near the dual threat quarterback of his early years in Seattle. In contrast to the Brady and Stafford moves, they landed on teams equipped to win. Wilson went from having a great 1-2 punch at wide receiver of DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett to a couple of decent but not great receivers in Jerry Jeudy and Cortland Sutton. And with his own play on the decline from the previous season's stats, this is evidence that taking a veteran quarterback is not the solution to all of a team's issues. In fact, it indicates that you need to have a roster close to being ready to win before making that quarterback addition to be the cherry on the cake, if you like, the final piece of the jigsaw. And that certainly wasn't the situation Wilson arrived at in Denver, and therefore was ultimately a failure. It has to be said that project failed in Denver and they moved him on. So, time for another drink before we go to example number 4. That's Matt Ryan. Now, Ryan had spent 14 years with the Falcons in Atlanta up until he moved to Indianapolis in 2022 as a 36-year-old. During those 14 seasons, Ryan led the Falcons to the postseason 6 times, peaking in the Super Bowl appearance in 2016-17. Now, let's put it out there straight away. I've beefed about this before on other articles and things. Ryan was ridiculously held responsible for the loss in that Super Bowl. But if you look at his stat line for that game, he was 17 of 23 passing for 284 yards, 2 touchdowns, and no interceptions. Not great, but certainly not bad. And yes, he missed throws under pressure in the second half. So there is some share of the blame for him and for the Falcons blowing that 21-3 halftime lead. Some of the blame. But he had been instrumental in building that lead. And he was not on the field when the Falcons defense allowed the Pats to score 25 second half points. And then a winning TD in overtime. Indeed, Bryant didn't even get on the field in overtime, so can't be blamed for that, for sure. Anyway, enough on that one. As I said, it always bugs me in the same but opposite way that, as I said earlier, quarterbacks nearly always Super Bowl MVP when often there are more deserving winners. A couple of beefs from me. My throat's getting very dry, so excuse me going for a drink. Right, on we go. As I said, Ryan was 36 when he left the Falcons. Unlike Wilson in Seattle, his final year in Atlanta saw a marked dip in statistical performance, so the warning signs were there to be seen for the Colts. But his year with the Colts was even worse than Wilson's time in Denver, as he played in just 12 games before being replaced by, believe it or not, a combination of Sam Ehlinger and Nick Foles for the final 5 games of the season. Those two failed to win a game, whereas at least Ryan had 4 wins and a tied game on his record for that season. So getting rid of him didn't make him any better. They were just not ready to win. So in terms of receiving weaponry available to Ryan in Indy, Michael Pittman was pretty much all he had. as the Colts had no wide receiver over the age of 25 available to Ryan. That's in stark contrast to what Brady and Stafford had available to them. If you compare that to what Ryan had to work with before, the trio of Tony Gonzalez Jr., Julio Jones, and Roddy White in his early years, then latterly Calvin Ridley and Carl Pitts, and excuses can be made for Ryan, age-wise and in terms of the talent available to him. But this was just flat out bad by both parties. The Colts were putting a fading and aging quarterback in a position to fail, and Ryan for doing so. So again, that's another one that just didn't work. So that's 4 examples this decade. I've got one more to come, and that's Kirk Cousins with his move from the Vikings to the Falcons in 2024. Now, Cousins is a slight different one here in that he hadn't played for one team for a decade before he moved. He'd had 6 years in Washington and then 6 in Minnesota. 12 years as one of the highest paid quarterbacks in the league, despite having only led teams to the postseason 3 times and winning just one playoff game before moving to Atlanta to replace Desmond Ridder. He arrived there to get talent such as Drake London and Kyle Pitts available to him, and then being joined by Darnell Mooney and Bijan Robinson as additional receiving weapons for Cousins to target. There was enough there for him to succeed. But Cousins had even better in Minnesota when you think about it, with Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, and TJ Hawkinson. Like Ryan, Cousins was 36 when he moved to the Falcons and was also coming off a serious injury that had ended his 23 campaign in week 8. He was on his way to another strong season stat-wise that year when he got hurt, but the team were just 4-4 after those 8 games. So rather than being the safe pair of hands taking a 36-year-old quarterback coming off an injury that had a similar small amount of risk associated with it, it had more than a small amount of risk associated with it, I should say. And he clearly was still inhibited by that injury that he picked up in 23. And he toiled through 14 games of mediocre performance. There were a couple of really good games, but generally he really toiled, recording just 3 games with more than 1 passing TD and registering just 1 passing TD across the last 5 of those games. Add to that, the Falcons had drafted Michael Penix in the first round of the 2024 draft, which must be an indicator of some kind that they had reservations about Cousins' injury and recovery from it. Yes, it can be argued that allowing Penix to acclimatise to the NFL before taking over as starter was a good idea, but paying what essentially was a cropped bridge quarterback, the amount they paid Cousins, just seems ridiculous. What makes this even more mystifying is that the same organisation had shipped out an aging, fading fourth quarterback 2 years before in Matt Ryan. So why then go and acquire the same sort of quarterback themselves? The whole thing was mystifying and just made no sense. And again, was another one that ended up in failure. So before I sum up, I'll go for a quick refresher again. So let's sum up my points here and my argument related to Rodgers and Co. and their moves this season. Brady and Stafford were the 2 successes. They were 2 quality, and in Brady's case, legendary quarterbacks that were still playing to a high level and were given quality cast to work with. So yes, taking a veteran quality quarterback as the finishing piece to a team built to win there and then is a great idea. Wilson, Ryan and Cousins all had performance or injury issues, or both, that had led to a distinct decline in performance and were going on to teams that were building for success rather than ready to win immediately. My argument is therefore that taking a veteran quarterback is not a safe move and can be distinctly detrimental if the circumstances regarding them and the team are not right. If the situation is not right, you're better going young or for a cheaper bridge quarterback option, in my opinion. So Aaron Rodgers is now in Pittsburgh. Geno Smith is going from Seattle to the Raiders. Russell Wilson is on the move again to the Giants. All 3 of those look like they are in the positions to fail rather than succeed in the way Brady and Stafford did. Right, let's go through these one by one. Start with Rodgers. He's the main one everybody's talking about. Rodgers gets DK Metcalf to pass to. Yep, accepted. But last year, he had Garrett Wilson for all and Devontae Adams for part of the season with the Jets, and he still had his career lowest passing yards per game, other than his last season in Green Bay. Like Cousins, he came into last season off a bad injury, and the guy is 41 and not going to be anywhere near the physical elite he was in his prime. This is why I've consistently lobbied for the Steelers to actually pass on Rodgers. As history tells us, this is likely to end poorly, as neither he or the team are equipped to excel. So I really, people can sell me that, oh, great, Aaron Rodgers in Pittsburgh, oh, great, it's going to be terrific. No, I'm going to tell you now, I don't think it will be. So that's him. Russell Wilson, I've already made the case about, but having essentially failed in Denver and Pittsburgh, he now lands on a Giants team with some receiving talent, but an O-line that's been dreadful for a while and was dreadful last season for sure. And that's liable to be bad news for Wilson and the Giants. Jameis Winston, we all know about. So Jackson Dart could be this year's Michael Penix, just sitting there waiting until Wilson fails, and then he'll get the job by default. Um, Geno Smith, slightly different proposition. He has 11 years in the league. The first two as a starter for the Jets before losing that job, then being a backup for them for 2 years, filling the same role for a year with the Giants and then Chargers before filling the same role again behind Russell Wilson in Seattle before he departed, before Wilson went on. Then he became the starter in Seattle. He had decent years as the Seattle Seahawks starter. But that was with the likes of DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett in their prime, and then Jackson Smith and Jigba to target. So you're great receivers to work with. Now he goes to the Raiders, who outside of Brock Bowers at tight end, do not have top end talent in their receiving core. Jacoby Myers and Trey Tucker are decent, but no more than that. And now they've got rookie Jack Betch, who's promising, but nowhere near the level of what Smith's worked with before. So with Bowers, Tucker, and Betch all clearly all early in their NFL careers, and star running back Ashton Jonty also in his first season, looks like a team building for the long term, but not being ready to win now, which comes back to my earlier point. So as per the Kirk Cousins situation, I question whether paying Smith is the right move for the Raiders, and they're certainly paying him. I'll come back to that later. Smith's career tells us he is a player capable of being a decent starter with quality receivers to throw to. But the Seahawks have moved on from him to Sam Darnold in pretty much a heartbeat, which tells us they think Darnold is at least as good as Smith, and he's 7 years younger. So if they think that, the Raiders are not getting a safe option at quarterback in Smith. They're getting, in my opinion, a below average starter who is in their mid 30s and giving him a lesser receiver core to work with than he had in Seattle. That's not a recipe for success in a similar way to what happened with Kirk Cousins. So, what are they paying for this? The Steelers are going to be paying Rodgers $13.6 million for his 1 year deal. Well, that 1 year deal gives the look of a team waiting to draft a quarterback next season and hoping Rodgers gets them to the postseason in the meantime. But another scenario that could come to pass this season is that after the Steelers meet the Bengals in week 11, they could be under 500 and unlikely to make postseason. If that were to come to pass, it's plausible to me. The Steelers and Rodgers part ways one way or the other. The Steelers say, time to move on, let's try something else. Rodgers says, we're not going to make the postseason, I retire. There is a possibility that they part ways. And then Will Howard's given a few games to evaluate him as a starting quarterback, as a first year rookie, basically, before they decide whether they have to draft somebody again in 2026. So you're paying 13.6 million for that. I don't see that as a good move. 13.6 million for Aaron Rodgers. Yeah, sounds good. But it's Aaron Rodgers at 41. Enough said. Now the Raiders are actually paying more for Geno Smith than the Steelers are paying for Rodgers. The numbers just are eye-watering to me. They're paying Smith 24 million in 2025 and due to paying 26.5 million in 2026 and 39.5 million in 2027, according to SpotRack. Smith could well prove me wrong, but paying that money means you want titles in return. And I just do not see that happening. And it baffles me why they would pay what is going to be 39.5 million for what will then be a 37-year-old journeyman quarterback. I'm not being horrible to Smith, but he's only had a few years as an NFL star. He's had as many as a backup as a starter. So why are you paying? He's going to be 37, and you've contracted to pay him 39.5 million. What? Makes no sense. So then we move on to the Giants. Including incentives, the Giants are paying Russell Wilson 11 million on a one-year deal, but are paying Jameis Winston a further 3 million this year and 4 million next. Their hopes of making the postseason in 2025 are very slim at best. So why pay both these guys and then draft Jackson Dart in the first round is the question I cannot provide a logical answer to. Surely not doing all three, but choosing one of the following makes more sense. So option A, pick up Wilson and Winston, but draft O-lineman instead of taking Dart when they did. Option B, pick up Winston and take Dart as the long-term plan, accepting you're not going to make the postseason at this, but you will be highly entertaining in 2025. Option C, draft Dart and put him straight in, but spend the 14 million you saved on those quarterbacks on a veteran O-lineman that you so desperately need. Option D, don't trade up for Dart. Then either take him in round 2 or another quarterback later in the draft while picking up O-lineman with the pick or picks you gave up to get Dart in round 1. You may not like some of those options, but there's got to be one of them, or at least one or two of them in there that are better than what they've done. So to wrap up, I will go on record now and I will predict that none of Aaron Rodgers, Geno Smith or Russell Wilson will play a single postseason game at the end of this season. Also, one or more of them may not be in their starting role before the end of this season. And that's not exactly what you want from the guy you want to steer your franchise out of choppy waters. More like somebody who's going to be looking to get the lifeboats readied. And the owners and front office are looking down from their suites saying, what iceberg? Titanic style. None of this makes sense to me. I think they're all doomed to fail. So in my sense, that's what are you doing here? I just don't see it working. So that's it for me. That wraps up my thoughts on veteran quarterbacks and Aaron Rodgers. I think all three of these that have moved this season will be failures in the long run, and their teams will be left saying, what do we do that for? So they're not in the positions that Brady and Stafford were when they succeeded. They're more in the positions that I mentioned related to Russell Wilson's previous move, Kirk Cousins, Matt Ryan. So that's my view on this situation. I'm going to come back next in my next piece, going through all 32 teams and looking at the one player that they can't afford to get injured. So that'll be my next podcast for you. But that's my view on these veteran quarterbacks. So hope you found that useful and stimulating. You may or may not agree with me, but that's just my view, and we'll see what happens. See you later.